Hello and welcome to The Brief, a video podcast that offers some perspective and analysis on global issues. I'm your host, Jim Clancy. As always, we appreciate a like or a follow, and you can find links to more of our episodes at thebriefpodcast.org. All humanitarian aid to Gaza was cut off for months, even as water sources were destroyed and some 2.2 million Palestinians were driven to the brink of famine. The U.S. confirmed plans drawn up with Israel to use private contractors to distribute aid. That's a scheme the United Nations has condemned as the weaponization of vital food, shelter, and medical assistance. A new Gaza humanitarian foundation has been announced that would oversee the distribution of humanitarian assistance in Gaza. Part of the strategy appears aimed at bypassing UNRWA, the UN Works and Relief Agency, that has for decades administered humanitarian aid, education, as well as medical assistance, not only to Gaza, but in Palestinian refugee camps all across the Middle East. Our guest on this edition of The Brief is UNRWA Commissioner General Philippe Lazzarini, who has been involved in international aid efforts distributing assistance to the victims of conflict and post-conflict areas all around the world for more than 30 years. Commissioner General Philippe Lazzarini, hello, and welcome to The Brief.
Hi, Jim. Pleasure being with you.
It's great to have you with us. A lot of important topics to talk about. The UN Relief and Works Agency for Palestine refugees has been around for decades doing its work, but now it finds itself in a position where Israel is trying to outlaw it, literally, from doing any operations inside Israel, at least. And how would you describe UNRWA's predicament today?
You're right, Jim. There is an attempt from the Israeli government to get the agency being dismantled. And the main reason behind it is because Israel wants to strip the Palestinians from the refugee status, and they believe that the agency providing human development services to these refugees, if it disappears, they will once for all solve the problem of the refugees. I would say until October 23, there was a kind of modus vivendi in the relation between the agency and the Israeli government. On one hand, politically, they disagreed with the reason of being of the agency, but pragmatically, they did not see what alternative could be put in place to provide education to hundreds of thousands of girls and boys across the region, to provide primary health care. Since October 23, this paradigm has shifted, and it is true that getting rid of the agency has become an objective of this war. We see it in the field by the total disregard of UNRWA staff, UNRWA operation, UNRWA premises. Nearly 300 of our staff have been killed since the beginning of the war. We have about 80% of our installation in the Gaza Strip which have been completely destroyed. But then we had also an additional layer on the attack against the agency. There have been political pressure, attempt to delegitimize the agency. Budget has been allocated to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs to undermine the credibility of the agency. And we have seen last year, by the end of the year, the Israeli parliament, the Knesset, adopting two laws, one outlawing UNRWA in occupied East Jerusalem, and the second one preventing any contact between UNRWA official and Israeli official in the rest of the occupied Palestinian territory.
Now, publicly, Israel says that the problem with UNRWA is that in one way or another, deliberately or by circumstance, UNRWA is supporting Hamas, a terror group that was responsible for the October 7th outrages. And you're saying it's not really about that. It's, the accusations have been there. The organization has tried to address them as best it can, but it's really about this whole issue of refugee status, the basis of the Palestinians' existence.
Absolutely. I mean, we have heard number of legislators saying once the bill has been adopted, that they have now finally an opportunity in a generation to get rid of the agency, to get rid of UNRWA. Because the belief is that if UNRWA does not exist anymore, there is no Palestinian refugees anymore. And if there is no Palestinian refugees anymore, the right of return is not an issue to be put on the table anymore. But this is a shortcut, because even if the agency stops providing its services to millions of Palestinian refugees, the statute will remain, because the statute will be addressed only the day there will be a political solution.
Well, UNRWA at the same time, you don't just operate inside Israel. I mean, this is an organization with tens of thousands of employees that are working in Jordan, in Lebanon, in other countries across the Middle East.
You're right. We have 30,000 employees across the Middle East, primarily working not only in Gaza and in the West Bank, but also in Jordan, Syria, and Lebanon. And our staff are primarily teacher, nurses, doctor, engineer, performing, in fact, public services for the Palestinian refugees.
When we look at that across the Middle East, the weight of all of that, we have to ask the question, there has been a concerted effort to cut your funding, and the United States and other countries have cut UNRWA's funding.
There have been concerted efforts. It is true that the first time the United States has cut its funding was under the first Trump administration in 2018. Then, under the Biden administration, the funding was resumed, but was again stopped a year before the end of the administration. At the time, there have been allegations that UNRWA staff might have participated in the horrible attack of October 7. At that time, there have been up to 16 countries who have temporarily frozen the contribution to the agency, but following the action taken by UNRWA, first, a thorough investigation behind all this allegation, and secondly, an assessment of all the internal mechanism of the agency to find out if systematically there could be flaws which could have encourage infiltration of the agency. After this to study, the majority of the countries have come back, and as of today, we have only the United States and one European country, Sweden, who have cut the funding to the agency.
You know, when we look at UNRWA and its operations, part of what you do is delivering that aid, which is now completely cut off. But you still have, as they would say, boots on the ground. You still have workers that are in there assessing the situation. And, you know, I've read some of the latest reports that came out, and it can only be described as catastrophic.
It's a total disaster. It's a tragedy. If we talk about Gaza today, UNRWA still have 12,000 staff. It is true that there is no food distribution anymore. There is no food to be distributed anymore. The last bakeries have shut down. The last kitchen have also shut down. And we have made our last distribution already weeks ago. So there is no food to be distributed, but we still have, on a daily basis, people coming to our health center. We provide 15,000 consultation in average a day still today in Gaza, and we have also colleagues who are dealing with sanitary issues such as preventing that people live in the garbage and also ensuring access to clean water.
And that clean water issue, another area of dire concern, because in reading your own assessments coming from your teams in Gaza, it seems to indicate that bad water, filthy water, is the root of some of the disease and health problems that are being noticed.
Well, this is correct, but you know, right now, people on a daily basis struggle to survive. They struggle hunger, they struggle the bombardment, but they struggle also disease, and also the unsanitary condition. And most of the time, in situation of a deepening hunger, of starvation, disease is an accelerating factor.
When you say starvation, we've heard starvation for months at the same time when bakeries were open and things like that. How is the situation different today? How should we understand it? When the outside world looks in, what should they see?
Well, we have to be aware that there have been cycles in Gaza that you might remember that 3 months ago there was a ceasefire which lasted for about 2 months. During this ceasefire, the humanitarian communities has showed its ability to significantly scale up the assistance in the Gaza Strip. And it was thanks to the assistance brought in that we have reversed the first alarm about starvation, the first alarm of deepening hunger. Now we are in a situation where for more than 2 months, a total siege has been imposed on the entire population. No aid at all has entered into Gaza. Today the stocks are completely depleted, and we had even a new warning from the organ monitoring the malnutrition within the United Nations system, indicating that as of today, we have already 500,000 people living in a catastrophic nutritional situation, and that the risk of famine can impact the entire population of Gaza if the siege is not addressed.
As we look at it now, we read the reports that the U.S. and Israel have come up with a plan to have private contractors move in, and they will handle at least what are called hubs, the distribution of aid. And the UN has already rejected it. But why? Is that a workable solution to replace UNRWA? I know you wouldn't want to see UNRWA replaced, but would it work?
You know, over the last 18 months, there have been few attempts to provide alternative to the traditional humanitarian assistance. You might remember the pier in Gaza. You might remember the airdropping. Each of these solutions did not replace or substitute to what was going on. That was not an alternative. Before the siege was again imposed, we had in Gaza about 400 distribution points. We had access to the entire population of the Gaza Strip. And when I say we, it's not only UNRWA. There are all the other UN agencies and international NGO. Now, today, what is being proposed is to bring down this 400 distribution center into 4 regional hubs. What is being proposed is assistance for a selected number in Gaza Strip. What is proposed is assistance to those who have been identified as deserving to be supported. So it really falls short from any basic humanitarian principle saying that assistance has to go to all those in need. And there is absolutely no reason to change a mechanism which until today has proven efficient. Again, going back to the period of the ceasefire, during this period, we have shown that we were able to bring into Gaza an average of 600 to 800 trucks a day, even to resume some little local market to complement the effort of the humanitarian community. What's being proposed today, it's a complete dystopian model, which basically right at the beginning will decide who can survive and who cannot survive in Gaza Strip.
How would they determine that? Now, I've seen, I have a little glimpse of that from the published reports saying that they would identify families, say, that live in Rafah, or families that live in Gaza City. And then a member of that family could come forward and take the aid for that family. What that aims to do, they say, is to cut out Hamas. Will it?
Listen, Jim, imagine a situation where a member of a family is asked to walk about 1 kilometer from the place where they are into the urban, being screened, coming back by foot with the assistance of 2 weeks for the family, going back where all the other people are living. If there is not enough assistance for everyone in Gaza, this person will be the first target for any kind of looting. So basically what we have heard as of today is geared to fail.
All right, you put a different perspective on that. And looting, it has been an issue. It's been contained in some of your situation reports.
Yeah, but looting is always an expression of despair. What we have seen were the looting of an angry population, desperate population, and it has taken place when you have the uncertainty whether yes or not there will be enough assistance. During the period of the ceasefire, we had very few looting going on because people and communities were reassured that there will be enough food for the entire population.
When we look at it, and you've had experience in places like Somalia, where that was certainly a problem, but also where warlords, and in this case Hamas, would try to divert that food aid, convert it into cash to support its military operations. I mean, you see that as the risk that is involved here.
But listen, there have always been in conflict situation risk of diversion. But it is also true that during the period of the ceasefire, when we were at the peak of our assistance in the Gaza Strip, we have not been informed about situation where aid brought in by UNRWA or other UN agencies have been deliberately diverted. Now, talking about this, we keep hearing about diversion from the Israeli military. I also do believe, Jim, that it is time for international journalists to also be present in Gaza, because there are so many narrative, counter-narrative. There is a war of narrative going on. Of course, we have heroic Palestinian journalists reporting on a daily basis at the risk of their lives on what is going on in Gaza, but I truly believe they need to be seconded, supported by international journalists who can do the investigation and tell us if really the diversion is as important as some want us to believe.
Have you been able to have any kind of dialogue with U.S. officials? The Israelis, they've banned talking with UNRWA. You're not welcome there. But have you been able to get any glimpse into why this would or wouldn't work at all?
Well, listen, there are daily dialogue going on with teams on the ground, also with Israeli officials. It is true that there is no direct contact between UNRWA and Israeli officials because of the ban, but it does not mean that there is no contact between UN humanitarian officials and Israel. So these discussions are taking place on a daily basis. Basically, what we are asking is nothing else than to be able to access to anyone in need of assistance in the Gaza Strip, as it has been the case during the ceasefire period, in line with humanitarian principle. And the humanitarian principle are not a goal in itself. It's a way to make sure that we access also the most vulnerable, the people the most in need of assistance, and that we leave no one behind when it comes to life-saving.
And you think that this idea of creating a private, somehow, organization, calling it a humanitarian, Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, will solve nothing?
Listen, this, I would describe it as a militarization of humanitarian aid through, I would say, a private mercenaries company who label themselves as a humanitarian organization. A humanitarian organization which does not respect the basic ethics and basic principle cannot be labeled an humanitarian foundation or organization.
but some of the people that are said to be involved, at least what I'm reading about, are people that have come from a history even working for the United Nations, working with humanitarian aid groups, private groups or public groups, NGOs. And so they do have some of that experience. And I even heard it put forward that they might utilize UNRWA employees and their skills in the distribution of aid. In other words, they wouldn't be UNRWA employees anymore. They'd be working for UNDP or someone like that. There was, shifting words, shifting names, shifting organizations to somehow cut your organization out.
Ultimately, we want anyone to be assisted, and this should be the primary goal. But what we have seen from the model which is being proposed is far from achieving this goal. It's based on selection of who should be assisted or not assisted. Secondly, we are decreasing the number of distribution places, and we are not protecting the people receiving the assistance from the community at a time we perfectly know there will be a deficit of assistance for the entire population. Now, I have no idea who will be in. There are names being circulated. We don't know if they are confirmed or not confirmed, but I really hope that no one will be selling its soul just because of profit reason.
When you look at that and you say profit reason, people get involved in these things and they have different motives. And you know that well from your experience, more than 30 years working for humanitarian groups. When you look at the way that things are going, President Trump has been relied on to try to, short circuit things. He's negotiating with Hamas. Do you think the U.S. really understands what's at risk here? As you say, if you only give the aid to a few people, you're putting them at risk, that the whole scheme isn't going to work. It's not doable.
I hope they understand. I hope that the decision maker understand what is at stake, basically. But I also hope that President Trump will use his influence to convince Israel to lift the siege, which is absolutely inhuman and cruel, and ensure that there is assistance provided to all the population, and that we also address the need of these children who more and more appear to be emaciated in the Gaza Strip because of the deepening hunger.
As we look at, that crisis unfolding right now, people are trying to understand. I mean, we can't even understand how, since we know so little about this, what mechanism will be used, how long it would take. And the situation, as we said at the outset, is already catastrophic. People aren't going to be able to wait much longer for anything, any aid.
I agree with you. And this is definitely a stain to our collective, I would say, humanity. That is the reason why it is so frustrating to see that member states who could have an influence are unfortunately not fully using it.
People have looked at this, they pointed a finger and said this is using starvation, withholding of food, humanitarian, whatever you want to call it, as a weapon of war. And that it speaks really of other intentions, including ethnic cleansing. Now, I know you don't get involved in politics or that side of things, but there are some hard facts that people have to face looking at what's happening in Gaza today.
I agree with you. I mean, food is being weaponized, humanitarian assistance is being weaponized, and the intent is not only to put pressure on the population or on the Hamas and to put political pressure, but the intent could also be to cleanse part of the population and provoke forced evacuation of the population. So indeed, what we are witnessing today is a disgraceful weaponization of humanitarian assistance. And all this is taking place under our watch, and we see it on a daily basis.
Why do you think you've been involved in this for a long time, with the Palestinians for a long time? Why is their plight so roundly being ignored across Europe, in the United States, in other places? It's not the headlines that most people expect to see.
No, and there is a feeling of double standard in the region. There is a feeling that international humanitarian law or human rights convention applies almost everywhere except in the situation of Palestine. So there is a deep sense of injustice. There is a deep feeling also that the world somehow is turning its back to the fate of the Palestinian. But you know, Jim, this will have consequences far beyond Palestine, because if humanitarian law is so blatantly disregarded in this context, there is absolutely no doubt that this will be replicated elsewhere across the world.
That's a dire message that people have to contemplate today. You know, there is talk. We talked earlier about the problem of trying to move these Palestinian refugees out of Gaza entirely. You would know that, you know, Jordan has been mentioned, Egypt has been mentioned and talked about, but you would know, as you know, you're active in both of those nations.
Yeah, we keep hearing about different type of plan. We also heard that Israel has put in place a department to encourage people in Gaza to leave Gaza. They have also indicated that they have reached out a certain number of countries across the world, not only in the region, as a potential future host of Palestinian. I don't know where we stand with this, but again, forced displacement of population is nothing else than ethnical cleansing, is nothing else than forcing people to leave their own homeland.
Philippe Lazzarini, where do we stand then today as human beings? I mean, I have heard for decades, as I, cover the world as a correspondent for CNN, heard for decades how the United States stood for humanitarian law, and yet we don't see the condemnation. We don't even see, a halt in arms shipments or demands for lifting of the humanitarian aid blockade.
I agree. Inaction is absolutely unbearable. It leads to indifference. Number do not, basically, people do not see human life or human faces. They just see patterns and number. And I do believe that in the coming years, if really we let the famine unfold, we let an ethnical cleansing taking place not only in Gaza, but possibly also later on in the West Bank, that in the coming years we will say, oh, but we always disagreed with this and we wanted to act, but in reality no one is really acting for the time being, and it will stay like a stain.
Philippe Lazzarini, UNRWA's Commissioner General, I want to thank you very much for taking the time to lay out some of these brutal facts for us and to consider our future and how what we do today is going to have a major impact on that future. We're writing it, I guess, ourselves right now.
And it will be very difficult to explain this to our children and our descendants if this is taking place under our watch at the time. We could have done more.
Philippe Lazzarini, thank you for being with us on The Brief.
Thank you, Jim. My pleasure.
And thank you for joining us. Please explore many of our other episodes of The Brief Podcast. You can find us on YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts. Give us a like or subscribe. For a complete listing, you can find more information at thebriefpodcast.org. For now, I'm Jim Clancy, and you've been briefed.